Hi there! My name is Lewin and I'm a professor at the Faculty of Chemical Engineering at the Technion. I will talk today about an alternative approach to lecturing, the flipped classroom, in which online lecturing delivers the bulk of course materials, leaving class time free for students to come to grips with their own learning by interactions with their teacher and with each other. We have a problem. Student attendance of lectures is dropping, and worse, so is the degree to which students engage when they do attend. An alternative take on classroom activity is this one. What do we see here? A discussion between a young person, perhaps a little younger than the students that we're used to, and his teacher. What is the attitude of our student? Looks interested, right? See how his body language projects that. Well, that's what we're looking for in our students: anticipation, interest, and involvement, to keep them attentive and participating in their own learning process. We are teachers, but is it really true that it's enough to look to our teaching? Surely the important thing is that our students learn. How can we conclude whether or not they are learning? Well, certainly not just by lecturing to them. We need to engage them in discussion to determine what they know and lead them in experimentation to improve on their knowledge and capabilities. Clearly, such activities need time, so here's the point. If we invest all of our contact time with our students in lecturing, we will not have time to do anything else. Worse still, we know that lecturing is a very inefficient way of teaching, principally because, for the most part, it means that our students mostly listen rather than actively participate. The way to improve how much students learn is to maximize their activity during our contact time with them. So here is a class-tested flipping classroom paradigm. It starts with an online lecture where students view clips and test their acquired knowledge at home at their own pace, which counts as their homework. They prepare all this in advance of the week's activity, which means that the teacher can also assess their competence in advance by monitoring their activity and quiz performances. I have found that things that help at this stage are to ensure that the online activities that accompany the video segments are one of the following: either regular quizzes, which could be multiple choice, matching, or numerical type questions; what I call your turn sandwich videos, that is, one presents a problem or design problem definition in one video clip and asks the students to try and solve it on their own, and then present a possible solution for them to compare with in the subsequent video clip. In advanced design courses, it's most likely that more than one possible solution can exist. An in-class discussion of possible alternatives is a powerful way to accelerate real learning. Or one asks students to prepare for an in-class brainstorming by beginning study and analysis of a given process situation at home in advance. All of these activities mean that students have the opportunity to really prepare for a successful class meeting, which comes next. The next step is to bring them to a class meeting, which substitutes in-class activities for what used to be regular lectures. What we do now is first wrap up and close any issues that were observed to be problematic from observation of the students' home activities in the previous phase. But most of the class time is invested in activities that I have found to be beneficial. Running quizzes to improve comprehension, some of them revisiting home quizzes, but some designed to expand on their knowledge or to generate class discussion. Learning results from first getting things wrong, understanding why, and then getting things right is how one learns. The most important component of my class meetings are open-ended problem solving and the resulting discussions about strategic and tactical advantages that are presented in the process. These are all examples of useful activities for class meetings. Had this precious contact time been used mostly for lecturing, it would have left very little time for them, and indeed students learn a lot more this way. This leaves the last stage, the active tutorial, where students spend most of their time getting to grips with problem sets on their own or in teams assisted by course staff. And this means that at every step of the week's activities, students have optimized their time investment in the course. At home, they build basic knowledge of the course material, whereas in contact time with staff, they have honed this knowledge to higher levels. These improvements are difficult to achieve in a regular class setting simply because there is insufficient time to achieve it. Okay, let me discuss now outcomes And so here, let me show you first a typical final grade distribution for my process design course before I introduce flipping and active tutorials. And what we see here, we see a bimodal distribution of grades. Obviously, some students did get the material, but a very large number had mediocre or substandard performance. And of course, these are the final grades. There's no fix to this problem now. In contrast, when moving to flipped classroom and active tutorial, a typical distribution is normally, as you see here. Most of the students clearly got the material in a very acceptable fashion. The variance of the course grade has been reduced. There is, of course, a tail of students who didn't make it, but the vast majority of students not only succeeded in passing the course, they did very well in the course. And this is actually what we're trying to achieve. And this is actually achievable using this approach. Now, how do we actually achieve flipped classes? What's involved in actually doing the transformation? So let me give you a brief step-by-step guide. This is a 7-step guide to flipped classroom. Step number 1, you need to have a game plan. I recommend that you begin by testing flipping on just one lecture, not an entire course, one lecture. You pick the lecture that you never manage to cover fully in a regular class. You make sure you plan for a class meeting and active tutorial. That's part of the deal. And you should be optimistic, but also realistic about expectations. There will be a percentage of students who don't like this approach, who don't like being forced to actually learn. The vast majority of students may be more enthusiastic about this than even you are. But be realistic and be prepared to make several iterations on this effort. Second, you should prepare online lessons. You should state learning objectives up front in each lecture and close with them in a summary. And this you should be doing anyway, but this is definitely necessary for an online lecture. You should divide your lecture into segments that can be delivered in 5 to 15 minutes, short video segments. You should ensure the content is complete. That means you leave no gaps because there is no correction on the blackboard. These lectures need to be self-sustaining when students review them. You should write and use scripts. And you should practice delivery several times before recording the segments. Let me give you a couple of words about recording equipment. To make effective recordings, you'll need the following equipment. I recommend that you use your laptop as a recording studio with Camtasia or some similar package installed and configured to run with PowerPoint. This is actually how I made this clip, of course. Alternatively, you could, of course, use a centralized facility to record your lectures, but you should accept much longer development times if you go that route. I would recommend that you use a sound capture device connected to a dynamic microphone for voice. Alternatively, you could just use the integrated microphone on your laptop, but you should be prepared for complaints from your students as to your poor sound quality. And actually, sound is actually more important than video. And here, just to illustrate the point, is my own video studio. What you see on my desk are, well, here's the dynamic microphone with a pop filter connected to an analog to digital recording device that converts the analog signal to digital input to the computer inserted via the USB cable. Here is my recording studio, my own laptop on which I have Camtasia installed, and this allows me to actually generate the videos like the one I've done for this webinar. And finally, for video recording, I recommend that you have an illumination on your desk so that your face is illuminated. Actually, the video camera on the general laptop is probably good enough so long as you are providing it with sufficient illumination. That's actually key. All right. Step 3 is to prepare effective quiz questions. Every video segment should be followed by a quiz question or a question cluster or an activity that tests the students' understanding of what they have just learned. You should prepare explanations for all of the answers, the correct ones as well as the incorrect ones, actually even more important, the incorrect ones, to trigger students in their learning process. You should allow students to retry every question if they get it wrong. This is not a test, remember, it's part of their learning process. Step 4, assembly of lessons and their testing. You should upload your questions and videos and generate what I recommend, a Moodle lesson or similar. Depends on your admin software that's running your courses. You should test the flow and system response for yourself, but more importantly, have your assistant perform an independent check. He or she didn't prepare the lesson. and will therefore provide a more reliable test for what you've done. Just to give you an idea of how flexible Moodle lessons can be, let me show you a typical setup. So one possibility, of course, is to set up your Moodle lesson just as a straight linear lesson, content followed by questions, one after the other. You could be more sophisticated. For example, in the event of a student getting a question wrong, you can add remedial material, which is projected to the student before asking him to try the question again. Okay, so you can have that feature in. You can decide that you could divide your content into parts, independent parts. So part 1 we just saw. Part 2 might be a very similar structure to part 1. Yeah, a couple of questions with the possibility of remedial material just as before. And to enable a student's flexibility in the order of the way they cover this material, you could set up a system with suitable flow control that allows the student to see each section independently. So this is just one possible setup. Moodle is very flexible. You can do whatever you want with this software. Okay. So step 5, plan for useful class meeting. You should prepare additional materials. You should try not to repeat what the students have already learned online. So your lesson can rely on short quiz questions to be used to foster class discussion. Mostly I try and fill the class time with open-ended exam-style questions to be solved with class participation. And you can also give students an opportunity to give presentations of their own in the class meeting. We are not under pressure here. We have time to do that stuff if it's useful. And here are more ideas for use in the class meeting. You could use quizzes to recall previous material. You could solve example problems with student participation, rely on brainstorming. You could discuss issues in case studies with student participation. You can pause during the meeting to quiz students and use their responses to generate class discussion. And of course, encourage questions from students. And you have now time to address the questions because there's no time pressure. The actual basic materials have already been covered by them at home. This is extra stuff. This is the real learning going on now. Step 6, you should always schedule an active tutorial. That means you give sufficient time should be scheduled in their program to actively replace the homework. That means students would then be sitting in appropriate seating arrangements. You should make each set of questions span from easy to difficult level, and you should allow time in class to discuss solution strategies. And of course, I suggest you leave solutions available freely online. Again, this is not a test, this is their learning. Final step, follow up on every component. Was the lesson well organized? Were there any questions that were problematic? Were there any questions that were particularly successful ones? How about the class meeting? How much activity was there in class? How many students attended? Were you happy about the outcomes? Active tutorial, again, how many students attended, how many students completed all tasks. My bottom line in all this is basically that anything that you do that gives this time for your students to get more actively involved in their learning is a good approach. You should each find your own approach. I have found my solution in flipping, and hopefully you will have found this lecture useful.